Today, we're talking about tomatoes, trellis types, and how to prune. Hi, and welcome back to Better Terra. I'm Josh, and today we're going to talk about our tomatoes. We're going to talk about different types of trellising, and then I'm going to get into ways to prune your tomatoes. The type of trellis that I use, pruning is very important. So I'll dig into the pruning. I get a lot of questions about pruning. What to prune, when to prune, what am I looking at on the tomato plant? So we're going to get all into that today. Excuse me for my voice. I'm getting over a case of the COVID here, and my throat is the last thing that needs to rebound. Let's start by talking about different ways to trellis your tomatoes. And I am by no means going to cover all of the different ways, but I'm just going to talk about some common ways and a couple of ways that I've used in the past. Let's get the ones that I absolutely do not agree with out of the way first. And it is the tomato cage. As far as for tomatoes, these are pretty worthless. My tomatoes have been in the garden now for 2 weeks, and as you can see, if I put this in next to a tomato and sink it down to its proper depth, it's going to very quickly be taller than the cage. And the tomatoes in my garden normally reach the top of what I call the tomato trapeze here, and that's at 9 feet above the soil surface. So something like this is not going to work for an indeterminate tomato. Now, if you could find a determinate species of tomato that stays quite small, this thing is 3 feet without being pushed down in the ground. So I mean, you're going to get about 24 to 30 inches of usable tomato cage or trellis. Now, what I do find that these work well for are pepper plants. My pepper plants normally get 24 to 30 inches tall, and the weight of the fruit tends to make them fall over. So I put these around the tomato plants, and then as they grow, train them around the cage. That works great for that. But even a determinate tomato they spread out a lot, and I just don't think that the tomato cage is a very viable solution when it comes to tomatoes at all. So for me, stay away from these and your tomatoes. As you can see here in my application, I use a suspension method. So this is a piece of nylon string connected to the top bar with one of these guys. And I made these out of wire and a template on a piece of wood. You can find devices similar to this online that don't have this hook. They're more for greenhouse applications. So I made it with a hook, so it'll hook over the top bar of the trapeze here. And then I just unwind enough of the string to go from the top bar to the ground. And then once the string is to the ground, use one of these clips, and it hangs onto the nylon string. It's got some little teeth back here, and whenever it clips forward around the vine, so it'd be here, and then you'd have your vine with a branch, and then it has something to hold against. And then as the tomato plant grows, you add more of these along the vine, as you can see here. I've already used 3 different applications of these as it gets taller. like I mentioned, pruning is very important in this method, and not allowing the suckers, and we'll get to what a sucker is here in a second, to make more vines. Every sucker on a tomato plant, an indeterminate or determinate, equals another main vine. So we maintain here, as you can see, a single vine. But what we're going to do today, and I did this last year, it worked really well, so I'm going to apply it again this year, excuse me, is I'm going to add a second suspension per plant. And when we get down here closer in a second, you can see that I've let one sucker down near the bottom to form a secondary vine. So what that allows is from one root mass in the ground, come up, form into two main vines. So for every plant, I'll have two vertical tomato vines, and both will produce tomatoes as if it was a single tomato plant. Had great production last year doing this, and the spacing remains 2 feet apart at the ground level, but at the top they get closer, and the tomato vines last year were just loaded with tomatoes. I noticed this morning here on one of the Better Boy varieties, I believe. Yep, the Better Boy. I have a tomato here. So that's the first tomato of the year. We have blossoms all along the row. So another method for trellising your tomatoes is called the Florida method. And I've used this in the past in other gardens, and it worked well. I find it works better for shorter rows. It's a little bit more manageable like that. And I've set up kind of a demonstration area here. So give me a second, let me swing the camera around, and I'll show you the method here. For a demonstration of the Florida method, I've set 2 T-posts here, spanning 3 plants. Now you could have this spanning up to 6 plants probably, but I, in my experience, think that every 3 plants is a good spacing for the T-posts. Now, you may immediately see a problem with, like I talked about before, excuse me, the T-post, these are just stuck down in the ground, they're not hammered in at all. These are only about 5 feet tall, and the tomatoes in just a few weeks will be this tall and taller. So to really be effective, you have to set a much taller post and then anchor that post from being pulled in from the weight of the tomatoes. So think about that if you're using this method. It is an effective method. I guess from the name, the Florida method, or the Florida weave, this is something used in Florida. So I'll show you here. So I have a piece of nylon string. Nylon does not stretch, so that's very good in this application. And what you do is you would have the nylon spanned to the next post as the tomato is growing. And this is a little bit more difficult to demonstrate because I already have my vertical supports in. So you would go down to one post like this, and then around, keeping it pretty taut with a little bit of pliability, and you'll see why in a second. Give it a wrap, and then do the same thing down the other side of the tomatoes. And then as it grows, let me see if I can demonstrate this a little bit better. As it grows, you separate the 2 pieces of the nylon and allow the tomato to grow through the 2 pieces of your string. And then to your next plant, you cross those strings over, spread them, and allow the tomato to be supported between those. So I'll demonstrate here what I mean by crossing the twine. And I'm just going to do a loose demonstration here. So here it goes on my left side of the string, the tomato, and then the next is on, the string is on the right side of the tomato. And then the next is on the left side. It goes around your post. Give it a couple of wraps. And then as it moves down your row, go on the right side here, it's going to be on the opposite side that you came on the first. And then the next plant, see here, it crosses over. And then you're on the opposite side of the string on the next plant. I'm trying to be delicate here with my tomatoes. I don't want to break anything. Here, string is on the left side, so we're going to move across to the right side. And then when you get back to your post, you tighten it up. In my case, I'm just going to wrap it around. So I'm not using the Florida method. So this would be one weave or one row. And then about 18 inches higher, you would have another weave. And then another weave. And as it grows, you separate the string, train the tomato through the string, let it hug, and go to the next one. Make sure it's crossed over and allow it to go up. Works pretty effectively. Still using that method. I feel it's important to still prune your tomatoes. So we've looked at 3 different ways to trellis tomatoes now, and I'll talk about a couple of different ways that can be used, but I don't have the materials to demonstrate. Another method is creating a large, tall cage out of a piece of circled, heavy fencing wire. This is a method that our friend Tim at the Fuzzy Cheeks Garden uses for his tomatoes. He's got probably 3-foot diameter cages made out of kind of medium weight fencing material. And then as tomatoes grow up through the middle, the holes in the wire are large enough that you can get your hands in for picking, and that works for his application. Another method for trellising or staking your tomatoes is using a stake next to your tomato plant. This can be a bamboo, metal, any kind of material that's rigid and can maintain the weight of the tomato plant as it grows. So you'd put that stake in right next to the tomato and tie it to the stake as the tomato grows in height. Obviously you have to have one stake per tomato using that method. I've used that method in the past, but I've had problems with the weight of the tomato vine being able to maintain on your material that you can find that is tall enough. So I've repositioned the camera a little bit here so you can see how we're doing our method. And I just call this the suspension method. There may be a different name for it, but that's what I tend to use. So across the back of the garden here, the garden is 24 feet, and I have 3 of these upright vertical galvanized posts. And what are these? Well, these came from a chain link supply store. Any place that sells chain link fence, you can get these. And this is the top rail of the chain link fence. So you normally have your thicker vertical posts, and then a rail that travels across the top that the chain link connects to. And that's what these are. These are top rail. These are 1 3/8", I believe, diameter, and they're 12 feet long. I have drilled a hole in the top cap of the garden, so it travels through the top cap and into the ground about 1 foot. So that's where we get our 9-foot height here. So I have 3, and across the top is the same pole. They fit together to make it continuous. It sticks off of each end about 18 inches. And at the top it uses a clamp that would normally be used for attaching this to the top of the fencing, and it holds that top rail on. It is very sturdy, and it has maintained the weight of all of my tomatoes. This will be the 3rd season we've had this installed. So our hooks and string binder, I guess, hooks across the top rail like this, but at the top, and then the string extends downward. And I call this the tomato trapeze. It works very, very well. It leans forward just a little bit so that the top rail is more centered over the tomatoes. In my opinion, I would suggest using whichever trellising method works for you, your space, and your garden. Using the suspension method works extremely well for our garden. It's very easy for us to manage. Picking is very easy. We walk right along the back edge of the garden here, and it's easy to pick. South is this way. It's 1:45 right now. Everything is in full sun. This just works for our garden. So pick a method that works for you. We've talked about a few different methods for trellising your tomatoes. And most commonly, trellising is important with the indeterminate species of tomatoes that have continuous growth through the entire season. And like I mentioned before, my tomatoes will touch that top rail almost every year, right near the end of the season. Determinate species of tomatoes I found have worked well when you can have a larger cage type system. So the fencing cage that can have a 5 or 6 foot tall height. We've tried doing one determinate last year right in this area of the garden, and it just sprawled everywhere, was choking some other things out. Didn't love it, won't do determinates back in this garden again. Determinates work well in containers because they don't get super tall. They just get kind of big and bushy. They develop all their fruit at one time, and then they're kind of done. So also choosing the right species for your garden is important. So let me shift gears here, move the camera around, and we'll get into pruning. What to prune, when to prune, and how to do it. Okay, so I'm going to do my best here to point out the parts as we can see them, and I'll try to get some up close examples so you can see in finer detail. This is hard to do on the camera on a tripod and talk at the same time. I'm going to do my best here. So I'm going to use my pruners here. Having a nice pair of pruners is important. These are sharp, they're clean, fairly cheap. I have several pairs. I can put a link to these in the description if you're interested in them. The sharp point makes it great for getting in the small areas where the suckers like to hide. So let's take a quick overview of the kind of the anatomy of the tomato. So the main stalk here. This is the main, what we would call the vine. And then this portion here, this is probably better in the camera. This is a leaf node, comes off of the main vine, and it ends in a leaf. No fruit is on here, just the leaf. This is another example here. Comes off the main vine, forms all leaves, no fruit, main vine, and then a leaf node. Up here at the top, coming off the main vine, you can see here we have flowers, and this is called a fruiting truss. So this is where the tomatoes will form, and they'll hang here on this fruiting truss. There's another over here. So like I said before, I've allowed one sucker to form another main vine, and that's this vine over here. So I have one main vine here and another here. And this guy right here is a sucker. It comes out in the crotch of the leaf node and the main vine. Here's a sucker. Here is another sucker. Down here, I don't know if this is in camera, this is another main vine, leaf node, sucker. So we get in there with our pruners and we trim it off as close to that crotch as we can. Here's another. We snip it off. Here's another small one there. There's one over here on our secondary vine. Trim that off. There's one down here that you probably can't see. So we get those suckers off of there because they will, like in this example, create a whole second, third, fourth, fifth vine. So I picked this tomato plant here because as you can see here on our main vine, comes up here, it's going to continue to grow. It'll put out top shoots here. This right here is a sucker that's been let go a little too long. And by too long, that could be a day or too long. So it's created a substantial vine here coming off. And if this was let go, it would form a whole third main vine structure. And we don't want that. We want to limit ours to 2. So again, we come in here pretty close and trim it off. This whole piece right here was a sucker. And if you compare it to the main vine, it looks very similar because it in itself is another individual vine structure. So we're going to get rid of that guy. So as we come down our tomato plant, we see here there's another sucker on the back side here we're going to take off. Get rid of that. Okay. Here's another that you probably can't see, but the suckers always come in the crotch of the vine and the leaf node. Vine, leaf node, there was our sucker that we got rid of, the big one. Fruiting truss. Are the suckers the only thing that we should prune? No. Any leaf node that's down close to the soil, that touches the soil, that is getting any kind of splash from the soil, should go, especially as the plant grows larger. And I'll reorient the camera so we can see some bottom leaves that need to come off on some of these plants. This could prove hard to see because of the shade, but this leaf node here is touching the dirt down at the bottom. And if I look farther over here, I can see a sucker that's come up really close to the soil surface back here. Let me move this one out of the way. That also needs to go. So we're going to come in here with our trimmers and trim those off. It's a good idea to have some warm soapy water or alcohol swabs to clean your pruners between plants, so you're not spreading any kind of disease. This leaf back here is also touching the ground. We're going to take it off. This one here in the front that I pointed out first, it is touching the ground, but it's also, you can see here, where the support string is holding on. So it's using that leaf node to brace against. So we're not going to take off the whole leaf, we're just going to take it off about halfway. That's okay. It'll still grow, it'll be happy, it isn't going to hurt anything, but it's getting it away from the soil. So those diseases and stuff that are in the soil don't make it into the leaves, causing blights and diseases and traveling through our tomato plants. Let me get a couple more close-ups here of what a sucker looks like up close and personal. Here is a great example of a sucker. Main vine, leaf node, sucker right here. Comes out right in the crotch. So we're going to come in with our pruners, give them a snip. Let's do a quick overview of what we talked about today. Tomato trellis types and tomato pruning. In my personal opinion, pruning is required with tomatoes. To have healthy, successful tomato plants, you have to prune. If you allow your tomatoes to grow, we'll call it naturally, they will be very bushy, not allowing very much airflow, allowing a lot of moisture to stick around, and you're just asking and promoting for disease, things like blights. You'll see a lot of leaf yellowing. You might see a lot of fruit. Typically, those fruits are smaller and probably less healthy because it's spreading the same amount of nutrient over a much larger plant area. With my method of pruning, I'm out here at least every other day with my pruners. Whenever there's tomatoes to pick, I am not picking without pruners in my pocket because suckers overnight will show up, and it's the best to get rid of them as soon as they show on the plant, so you're not losing nutrient down those other vines. They're going to cause your plant to be, yes, bigger, but also much more prone to diseases and such. So even though I limit mine to 2 main vines, no vines past that, I get a lot of fruit that is has a little bit more substance to its size. The prunings, these are all of the suckers that we pruned just a little bit ago. These normally, unless they're showing any signs of disease, go right into the compost. So I normally let them accumulate here behind the garden, rake them up, put them in the composter. Something else that I do, and I can't show it now because we haven't started producing fruit, but another thing that I prune as the tomatoes get taller and are producing fruit is I get rid of all of the leaf nodes below the last ripe tomato. So the tomatoes will form as the indeterminate vine gets taller, the fruits will start, those will all become ripe, that fruiting truss will become empty, and then you'll have the next bunch of ripe tomatoes above that. Anything below that bunch of ripe tomatoes, I get rid of all of the leaf nodes below that because those are drawing in nutrient before they can come up to where the fruit is. So later in the season, we'll update on the tomatoes, and you'll see on mine that there won't be any leaves from the ground level up, sometimes a pretty good height, depending on where that last ripe fruit is at. If you have found this episode helpful, informative, fun, whatever, please click that like button. Let us know. Tell us that we're talking about stuff that interests you. If there's something that you want to see, or if you have another suggestion, leave us a comment below. We love reading comments. This is just the start of the growing season. We've only had our main plants in the garden for about 2 weeks, so we have lots of episode and content on the horizon. So if you don't want to miss those, subscribe, click that bell icon so you get notifications when we put out new content. We appreciate you watching. We're surprised with the amount of subscribers that we have. We are striving to reach more and more people with every episode we produce. So I'll put links here to our social media presence, so you can check us out there. We post pictures, other kinds of videos. Check those out. I'll wrap it up and say, keep on working toward a better Terra, one tomato vine at a time.